Thanks for the introduction. And my talk is called "The App Has Changed and All Tests Are Failing. How do I fix them?" I hope you like the talk, and I hope you live with some ideas on how to do that if you are in a case like what I'm going to show you today. So automated web tests, they can fail due to different reasons. I couldn't think of a long list of reasons, but some of them are that they found a real bug, and in such a case, you don't need to fix the tests. What needs to be fixed is the application, because the tests, they actually found a real bug. There are also the flaky tests that Brian just mentioned in the beginning of his talk. Those are the non-deterministic tests that sometimes they pass, sometimes they fail, even if there's no change in the application or the testing code. And these tests, they need to be revisited and fixed to provide deterministic results. And there are also the case where the app has changed and the tests have not been updated accordingly. And these are the failures we'll look into today. All right? So a couple of reasons why tests can become outdated. I couldn't think of a long list, so if you have more reasons for tests to become outdated, feel free to send them in the chat. But a couple that I could think of are that the app and the tests, they live in a different repository and they are not synchronized. Many people actually come to me and ask me, Walmyr, should I put the end-to-end tests together with the repository of the application or in a different repo? I always encourage people to have the tests in the same repository as the application that they are testing, because this helps on synchronizing changes in the application with the test code. It also helps on not having this division where developers write feature code and testers write testing code. If a developer breaks a test because it forgot to do something in the test, because he changed or she something in the application that broke a test, if the tests live in the same repository, it's easier for developers to fix the tests and not depend on someone else to fix them. There is also another reason, could be that testing was done by a specialist who left the company, and the team that depended on the tests kept changing the application without updating the tests. And in this case, let's imagine that sometime after someone else is hired, and one of the tasks of this person is to update the tests accordingly to the application changes that happened. Or even the team decided that, you know what, those tests, they were very beneficial for us and we should update them, because then we can make changes. And if they break, we can know that we should not release a new feature to our users. We have to fix the issue beforehand. So those are the couple of reasons that I could think of. If you could think of more reasons, feel free to send them in the chat. And to exemplify these changes in the application that break the tests, I'm going to bring here a real example. I put some links here in this slide so you can go to the repository if you want. So here in the right, there is a test suite of 26 graphical user interface tests, and 22 of them are failing. These are tests for a project of mine. It's a pet project from the time I worked at GitLab in 2019, and I keep updating this as a sample project to demonstrate best practices using Cypress. So you can find the repo on github.com/WLSF82/GitLab-Cypress. And this test suite tests a node version of GitLab, which is version 12.5.2, which is hosted on my Docker Hub, and you can find the link in here as well. And to demonstrate the idea of this talk, I created also a version, I got a version of GitLab, a recent version of GitLab, which is version 16.4.1, which is also hosted on my Docker Hub on this link below here. And I executed the same tasks against this new version of the application. So it's a brand new version of the application compared to a very old version of the application. And as you would expect, many of the tasks would fail. So I have already fixed 4 of these tasks. So as you can see here, there's tasks for login as non-default user. Those are already passing. There is a task that creates an access token. This is already passing as well. And there's one that reopens a closed issue. This is already passing as well. So I fixed some of them just to experiment and see how it would be. So I could show you an example in here. Before we go into the details, I want to mention that this task suite here, it's a task suite that I created in a very optimized way. And I want you to leave this talk with the idea that you have to create tasks that are optimized. What do I mean by that? Many of the tasks that you see in this application, they require, for example, that the user have to be logged in. Logging in through the graphical user interface just to do something that requires the user to log in for every task is a waste of time. So one of the ways I optimize these tasks is using site.session. I log in through the GUI once, I save the session in the browser, and then when another task comes that needs login, it basically restores the session and arrives at the task already logged in. Other things that I do to create optimized tasks is that I create many of the resources that are needed for the task to run through the network layer using side.request. So for instance, there is this task here that comments on an issue. To comment on an issue, I need to log in. So I do login through using side.session, but I also need a project and I need an issue. If I would create a project through the GUI, create an issue through the GUI so I could comment on an issue, it would be, my task would spend more time setting up the data than doing what it's supposed to do. And also I would be over testing my application because there is already a task for creating a project. There is already a task for creating an issue. So I do everything in a very optimized way so we can focus on the target of the task. Okay, so let's go and see the examples. But before, I want to mention that this is the process that I use from seeing a red task until I make it green. So there are only 5 steps, and the first one is that you should look into the logs. You analyze the logs from the execution on headless mode. One great thing is that Cypress tasks fail with very useful error messages. So I highly recommend that you read them. And if you read the messages, you have already some clues of what is going on and what you have to do next. The second step is to open the Cypress app to reproduce the failure in isolation. So you executed, for instance, those 26 tests in headless mode. You saw that 22 of them are failing, and you decide, you know what, I'm going to start fixing them, but I'm going to start fixing one by one. I'm not going to fix the 22 all at once. So I'm going to pick one of them, and I'm going to reproduce the issue in the Cypress app. So I will run the specific test in interactive mode, and I will start debugging directly into the browser. This is very important because Cypress runs in the same browser that the application is running. So we can benefit from debugging a failure directly inside the browser, all right? After you have reproduced the issue locally in interactive mode and you started debugging it, you can go to the code editor based on what you found on steps 1 and 2, and you can go to the exact line of code where the test is failing. And after you found the line where the test is failing, you can go to step 4 to fix the test, or at least to do the first fix. And then you save the file. Cypress automatically reruns your test in interactive mode if you haven't disabled that. And then you can or see your task passing, or you can have more feedback to see what you have to do next. And step 5 is basically repeating steps 2 until step 4, until your test is green and you are confident about it. Okay, so now let's look into an example. So let's see. So the example I brought here is for this test here that labels an issue. So on GitLab, you can create a project. For a project, you can have many issues. For a project, you can have many labels, and then you can put a label to an issue. For instance, that this issue is a bug, or this is a feature request, or wherever you think it could be used as a label. So in this case here, we have this task. It's failing with an assertion error. It timed out retrying after 4,000 milliseconds. It expected to find an element with the class QA edit link labels, but it never found it. So we already know what is going on. The Cypress couldn't find an element with a specific class. So the next step, as I mentioned previously, is I would open the Cypress app and I would reproduce the issue in isolation. And I can see here in the Cypress app that I am inside of the issue. I can see the edit button, which I was trying to interact with, but none were found. As you can see here, there is zero matches for this selector. And below here, we see exactly the same error message that we saw in the stack trace before in the logs. So this is a clue that probably the selectors have changed. And so continuing in the Cypress app, I open the DevTools by inspecting that specific element which I wanted to interact, but Cypress wasn't able to. And I can see that it's a span element that has the edit content, and it's inside of a div with data test ID sidebar labels. Also, it has an attribute called data QA selectors labels block. So, and I can see here the previous selector that I was looking for, which was a class that started with QA dash. So the selectors have really changed between that old version of GitLab to this new version that I'm testing now. So the next step is I go to the code editor and I find the exact line of code where the test is failing. So in here on line 159, we have on 158, we have a custom command called GUI label issue with, which executes a function which receives a label, and then it tries to click in the edit link button, and this is where it's failing. So it tries to click in the link so it can label the issue afterwards. So we know exactly where we have to change the test. And the first fix would be then to update the selectors, since this is what had changed in this specific case. So I would update the GUI label issue with custom command. So instead of using this sci.get QA edit link labels class, I would do a sci.get for an element with the data QA selector labels block. From this sci.get, I would chain a .find to find the data test ID edit button, because this data test ID edit button, it exists for other elements. So by chaining the find after the get of this specific block, I'm certain that I am in the right element, and then I click on it so I can label the issue. And when I save this file, I go back to the Cypress app and I have new feedback. My test is not green yet, but I have evolved. As you can see, the label has been correctly set. But I have another failure. Now I have a failure that I was trying to find an element which had the QA labels block class, and the label, the content of the label contained in this element, and 0 elements were found. So no elements were found. I was expecting that element to be visible. Since there were no elements with that class, the test is failing. So I open DevTools inspecting that specific element, and I can see here that it's a span element that has in the content of the element the exact text of the label that was set. This element is inside of another span which has the data QA label name with the label name that was just set. And this one is inside of that div with data test ID sidebars label and data QA selector labels block. So I have another clue of what I have to do to make my test give me more feedback. And in this case, I open the editor, and now I'm not in the custom commands file anymore. I'm in the test file itself. So before I was in the commands JS file looking into this GUI label issue with custom command, which receives a label, which in this case here is a variable. This one we have fixed already. Now we are failing on line 26, where we are doing our assertion that the element with the QA labels block class that contains the label name that we are setting should be visible. But since no elements were found with this class here, the test is failing. So the next fix is, instead of doing that side.contains, I do a side.get for an element with the data QA selector labels block. From it, I find the data QA label name with the label name that was just set, and I assert that it should be visible. I save the file, I go back to Cypress app, and I see if it can give me more feedback. And we have some great feedback here because the label was set. We have one passing test, but we are not there yet, because as you can see here, Cypress identified actually 2 elements with that specific selector. And we see also that it has an icon of a closed eye just beside. And we want to ensure that the element is visible, but it seems that some elements are not visible. Maybe one is and the other one is not. So although we have a green test, I mentioned before that you should be confident about the passing test, not just having a passing test. So we will need, in this case, a final fix. And the final fix in this case is, again, I am inside of the browser. Cypress runs inside of the browser together with the application. So I inspect, again, the same element, but this time, instead of going to the DOM, I go to the console because I have access to it. And to make sure that this selector really returns 2 elements executed here, document.query selector all, and I pass the exact same selector. And I noticed that it returned an array list with 2 elements. And when I highlighted the element with index 0, this was the element highlighted in the DOM. The other one was the element that is there, but is not visible. So now I know exactly which element I want to make my assertion against. So my final fix is I go back to the editor, and after the .find, I chain a .first, so I can make sure that I am asserting that the correct element is visible in the page. And when I save and I rerun, then I have a deterministic result that the correct element is visible in the page. And when you are done with that, you have one last failing test. So in the very beginning, we had 22. Now we have 21 failing tests. We had 4 passing tests. Now we have 5. And the test that we just fixed is green. After you were done with that, you jump to the next failing test and you start the process again. Since I don't have that much time, I'm not going to be able to show you another example very step by step, but here is another example all in one page, from the failures in the log to reproducing the failure and seeing the exact same error in the Cypress app, opening the editor. In this case, it was really interesting because it was not just fixes in terms of changes in the selectors. In here, for example, I was doing site.visit to projects/new, and the application is now different, and I have to go to projects/new hash blank underline project. So besides changes in the selectors, there were changes in the URLs that I had to visit, and there were functionality that were deleted. So you see here the whole process from going to the code, going back to the Cypress app for it to give me feedback, fixing more stuff, getting more feedback until I had a green test again. Oops. And so I have some final words for you, and those are that fixing tasks due to app changes is not hard, but it requires some effort. The tasks can be failing due to selector changes, due to new behavior, app behaviors, due to deleted or changed functionality, etc. But your goal is to find exactly what has changed, fix it step by step until you see it passing again. Also, because the app has changed, you should learn in the process. So you should learn what has changed, what new functionality was introduced, which functionality has been deleted, which functionality has been updated, and so on and so forth. And finally, you have to remember that your fixes have to work not only on your local environment, but also on CI. We heard Brian saying that sometimes tasks pass locally, but when we go to CI, they fail because they are running in a different environment with different computational power, different variables, and this kind of stuff. So you have to make sure that your fixes work not only locally, but also on CI. To wrap it up, I want to mention that I have a gift for you. I have recently launched a brand new course called Cypress from Zero to the Cloud, and you can find a coupon link with a free 1,000 free subscriptions in the resources section here on Airmeet. I'm so looking forward to your feedback on this course because I put a lot of effort and I put a lot of love on it. So I'm looking forward to you going through the course and giving me feedback.